Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. I am Jason Burmis. Today we're going to be talking January 6th, the 2024 elections, and much more with our guests Chris Paul and Matt Braynard. He's the executive director of Look Ahead America. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness.
They immediately recoiled when you asked any questions about January 6th. And that was a tip-off to me. I mean, I had no thought in my head as I watched this happen on television and in the subsequent weeks that U.S. law enforcement or military agencies had anything to do with it. That never crossed my mind. I never thought that it was a false flag or anything like that. I'm not a conspiracist by temperament. I never thought that. And then I interviewed the chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, in an interview that was never aired on Fox, by the way. I was fired before it could air. I'm going to interview him again. But Stephen Sund was the totally non-political, worked for Nancy Pelosi. I mean, this was not some right-wing activist. He was the chief of the Capitol Police on January 6th. And he said, oh, yeah. That crowd was filled with federal agents. What? Yes. Well, he would know, of course, because he was in charge of security at the site. So the more time has passed, now it's been...
The more time has passed, the more revelations have come. But as somebody that was there on the scene of January 6th, it was very evident that obviously there were federal agents and assets. And yet we have this mythos out there that there's some kind of domestic terror threat, while people who did little more than use the bathroom are looking at years and years in prison and painted as domestic terrorists. Meanwhile, you're not allowed to question the election of 2020 and anything that may have been fraudulent about them, especially the machines. Of course, the machines love us, and so do companies like Dominion and others. I promise you, they absolutely do. So here to discuss those issues and much more is the executive director of Look Ahead America. He is Matt Braynard. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. What do you think of these revelations from Tucker Carlson, really just telling us what we already knew, that there were indeed federal agents and assets on the scene of January 6th?
It's not surprising. It's not surprising to me. It's not surprising to you. In fact, there have been a tremendous amount of individual videotape released of that day showing very suspicious behavior of individuals who were not targeted by the FBI for arrest, who were not on billboards, or in some cases, they actually showed up as being targets of the FBI for investigation and then mysteriously disappeared. And there's really no question about whether or not there were federal agents in the crowd, Metropolitan Police, plainclothes people in the crowd. The question is, well, what did they do in that crowd? Did they encourage people to push forward? Did they themselves break windows? Did they rally the crowd to do illegal behavior? And I think that what we really need to have are probably two things. Number one is we need a complete public release of all of the footage that the Capitol has, 14,000 hours of it that's been kept from us, that's been teased out a little bit here or there. That needs to be released so that the army of keyboard warriors, many of whom probably watch this show or who help out Look Ahead America, can help document exactly what happened that day. But secondly, I think that the voters need to hold the people who are running for the highest office in the land, the only office that has any ability to do anything about this, accountable for what they're going to do for the people who are politically persecuted. So Look Ahead America has launched a bounty. We're going to pay anybody $1,000 to ask the presidential candidates, Republican, Democrat, Green, Independent, etc., who are on our list, what they're going to do for the January 6th political prisoners, especially those who've not been charged with any violence, which is the vast majority, like 95% of them have not been charged with any violence. So we're hoping that citizen journalists will ask the presidential candidates these questions so that voters can be informed when they cast their ballot about what they're going to do about the greatest civil rights violation of our day.
Absolutely. And I like that you talked about the importance of the video. Let's look at that Tucker Carlson expose. Literally, I believe within a week of him releasing the Jacob Chansley footage of him being paraded around the Capitol. All of a sudden, this guy that was looking at several more years in prison was in a halfway house and has now been released. And let's be honest, Jacob Chansley was never violent, right? And that's the power of video. And that's why I also love the power of the people asking the real questions. We have to be the journalists that hold these people accountable. And I remember when I was doing this 15 plus years ago, it was a little tougher then. You know, you didn't have an internet connected device in high definition. You have to get them on a handy cam, ask the question, upload it, email it to people, try to make it go viral. Now you can do it in real time. I love the fact that you're giving a monetary reward, but I would encourage people to do this despite that and hold these people accountable, because like you said, a lot of these people, the vast majority of them, committed absolutely no violence that day, and many of them have been in solitary confinement.
You know, and I'm happy because we've already cut our first check for $1,000. Somebody asked Governor Asa Hutchinson, not exactly the biggest name in the presidential derby, but someone nonetheless. I was very happy to send that check. I wish I could give more because it just gives a little bit of an incentive and also helps raise the profile, because what I want to have happen is for each of these candidates to be asked this question multiple times, for them to know that they have to have a competent answer on it. It's because the treatment of these individuals, to me, is just absolutely outrageous. Just on Friday, I was talking to one gentleman, because look ahead, among the things we do on this front is a podcast where we give these political prisoners the chance to tell their stories. One gentleman, he has never done anything political. He had never heard of any group like the Oath Keepers until actually January 2021. He wanted to go to DC to just see what was going on. And he happened to be pushed as part of a mass into the Capitol building. And he was just there because, he had this bizarre idea that, he was there to provide medical, because he's a medical professional. He was there to provide medical assistance to help keep President Trump safe or something. And he got brought in with this group, the Oath Keepers, and he had never heard of them before. He was pushed in the building, and then he exited about as soon as he could. 3 years. He's gotten 3 years for that. And you can kill somebody and get away with less time than that. It's absolutely outrageous. And it's because he's being scapegoated, and others like him, because there needs to be a narrative. He's being scapegoated for the sake of a narrative that there was ever a serious insurrection on January 6th and not just a rowdy protest, not dissimilar from the many that Code Pink has had in recent years as well, and that I'm sure we're going to experience many times in the future when it's a left-wing cause, but it's treated with kid gloves. So that is something that, you and me, there's not a whole lot we can do. It's really the next occupant of the White House that has the power to set that agenda, to issue some much-needed pardons. And again, you and I were also in the field of educating voters, so getting every presidential candidate on the record for what they're going to do to these political prisoners, to do for them. That's really our role right now. So I appreciate you having me on to talk about this program. And we look forward to releasing many more videos, and we'd love to send some of them your way so you can air them as well.
Well, it's certainly something that we would want to air here, because the citizens out there that are holding these people accountable are so important to this process. They're at the crux of the issue. It's shining the light of this darkness out to the public is how we're really going to make any kind of change. And I don't know that we can have a free and fair election in 2024 unless we clean house on a number of issues, including infrastructure within the voting itself. I think it's great that we're going after these candidates, but for 2024, we already have an administration that's told us they're going to arrest more people, not less, for January 6th in the coming months. If they maintain office, I think that you could also see arrests for those that basically they associated in their faux hearing via the January 6th trials and an executive TV producer, where you had the likes of Alex Jones, Tim Pool, and other internet personalities somehow being interwoven into this narrative of an insurrection that didn't happen, despite the fact they weren't at the Capitol. Jones actively outside the Capitol told people not to go in. So how do we, I think this is a good way to overcome that narrative. How can we take it further?
There's only so much on the legal front that we can do, but what we can do is help educate our fellow voters on the importance of this issue. And the most important thing that we can do is encourage them to vote and vote vote as early as possible in the process. And I know that there's a controversy around this issue, whether we should be doing ballot harvesting or GOTV. And I know that you raised some issues about election integrity in the beginning. Look, I'm probably one of the nation's foremost experts on election integrity. I'm probably the leader of the only organization that has successfully gotten people convicted for voter fraud and gotten people who are illegally registered removed from voter rolls. We've advocated and successfully passed legislation around the country, but since 2020 to help ensure election integrity, improve the process, and we've done that in states all across the country. We've done a phenomenal job documenting illegal ballots in states like Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. But what I can say is that we're focused like a laser on election integrity. We've given people tools to ensure an election integrity that no one has ever done before. We can give you in your county every voter that deserves scrutiny because they have moved away and no longer likely belongs on that voter roll. So we've put that data in the hands of thousands of activists in the last election in 10 different states all over the country. But what we can't understate enough, and we're involved in a very big project here in Virginia this year because we've got some very important elections here. And that is we've got a very aggressive early vote GOTV ballot harvesting program here in Virginia targeting the many disaffected patriotic Americans of rural and blue collar backgrounds who do not vote. And because turnout is so low in the 2023 elections here in Virginia, every vote counts that much more. So while we're not letting anything slip on the election integrity side, we are going to do election monitoring, voter list hygiene, all those kinds of things. What I cannot encourage enough is that we have to vote and ideally vote as early as possible. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and I'd be happy to go into that if you'd like.
Well, we've got to take a break, but when we come back, I do want to talk about our election infrastructure. I want to talk about the machines, audits, mail-in ballots, and so much more. We'll be back after this. It is Making Sense of the Madness. We are back. It's Making Sense of the Madness. We are joined by Matt Braynard. Now, Matt, a lot of people reference the Carter-Baker Commission during the election, specifically on mail-in ballots. And obviously, mail-in ballots are a way for massive corruption, which I think we saw in 2020. But they also talked about the machines. And Carter specifically said, we don't really do an audit of these machines. I suggest a 3% audit. I think that's extremely low. I think we want at least a 30% audit, if not auditing half of these machines. And to me, the bottom line is, unless we get fair audits out there, we have this great narrative going that people hate Trump and that he's a massive criminal. It doesn't matter that he's getting standing ovations at UFC events. These are the people that are in control of the technology and then the censorship that comes after these votes. So aren't the machines, I've been talking about this issue since Diebold, at the crux of the issue?
Sure. Just to go back slightly to mail, you're right that mail is a vector for a lot of illegal ballots, and we've documented many of them. But even though it is a vector for illegal ballots, that doesn't mean that you, a legitimate voter, should not cast your ballot as soon as possible via mail. And you can look, even if you want a good example, is Arizona, where I think it was clerical incompetence. Some people think it was something more nefarious, but there were a lot of problems at some of those voting day locations that caused long lines and other confusion and may have discouraged some people from casting ballots. There were no issues with anybody that cast ballots through the mail. But now you're asking about machines. And look, I have gotten 2 threatening letters from Dominion myself. I've had to have attorney's fees to respond to those letters. I have stopped Dominion's purchase, or the state of Louisiana, from buying $110 million worth of equipment in Louisiana. I'm currently suing Ohio because they violated their own laws in purchasing Dominion equipment. So I've been fighting it tooth and nail. And I do believe that there should be there's different ways to conduct an audit to make sure that the machines are accurately tabulating votes. And we found cases where, through clumsy incompetence, that these machines have miscounted votes. And one very specific case we did a good job documenting. But the real problem with these machines, and it used to be a bipartisan issue, The real problem is that there's no accountability for the software, the schematics. A county, a state can spend millions of dollars on this equipment, and they don't have the right to open it up with a screwdriver. They don't have a right to see the software, the code that's behind it. So that's why we've been, and this is the reason why Dominion's come after me. It's not because I've made claims like, that can be litigated like what was done with Fox News. It's because I am loudly advocating that all voting equipment be required to be open source. And that means that the software is publicly available and can be reviewed, and the hardware is publicly available, and the states that buy it can do their own internal audits of how valid that software is. And not only does that instill greater trust in the tabulation of elections, but it reduces the cost, because when you have a vendor who's the only one that's allowed to provide services for, to repair, to update closed source black box voting equipment, that's a monopoly. It dramatically raises the prices. So open source voting equipment would be half the cost. And you could create home state jobs with it, because a local tech firm could then service that election equipment rather than being dependent on an out of state or even out of country voter data vendor like Dominion or the ES&S, other companies like that. So there's a lot of reasons, and a lot of reasons for bipartisan agreement and nonpartisan agreement why we should get rid of black box voting equipment. That's something that Look Ahead's been leading on for years, and we've actually successfully gotten legislation introduced in New Jersey, of all places. And in fact, we've actually made progress in California on this issue, because now if somebody has open source voting equipment, they want to get it approved by the state for use in elections, now it's free. They don't have to pay any fees. And we've helped advance that issue in places, as far-flung and perceivingly like lost hope and lost cause as California.
Well, I think you have to, especially if you're going to use the machines. I'm one of those guys that really wants a paper ballot and a real audit in real time, with the polling outside and those type of numbers reflecting what we might see. And I guess that you could argue that true polling could happen in 2024, but I'm not so sure. And I think that we have a real problem with our infrastructure when in 2020 you had a Supreme Court even narrowly rule that basically there was no standing to audit any of this. What do you have to say? I mean, as somebody who's inside the legal system, fighting this good fight, about the fact that we have more and more judges that outright won't even look at the evidence anymore?
I think that since 2020, a lot of stakeholders have gotten much more involved than they ever were before. Look Ahead America, we've been involved. We did our first election monitoring in 2017 here in Virginia. So we've been involved with this for a long time, but since the 2020 election, I personally witnessed that many stakeholders, including parties, election integrity operations at the state level, have completely infiltrated the election process, where they have eyes and ears everywhere. I remember on election night in 2020, following another county party person who was basically monitoring the movement of a drop box back to the central counting office. And I know that in those counting offices from coast to coast, we've done a really good job of getting people to observe and filling all those election monitoring jobs that previously were empty. So I think that between the different stakeholders, the parties, et cetera, they've done a very good job, as well as some states have actually done a good job of doing things like banning Zuckerbugs and increasing the requirements for hygiene on voter lists. I mean, even the state of Georgia followed the cue from Look Ahead and removed 100,000 illegitimate voters from their voter rolls, following our very own example that we set for them, even though they don't give us credit. So I think things on the election integrity side are moving in a much better direction. And look, if this is something you care about, by all means, volunteer for your local party to be an election monitor. A lot of times those jobs go unfilled because they have nobody to fill them. And this is an opportunity for some real grassroots activism.
I want to shift gears back to January 6th for just a minute, and this kind of great narrative, not only that there was an insurrection, but there's domestic terrorists everywhere, and white supremacy is also aligned with these people. Everything's going to happen to the point where the family members of these January 6th political prisoners, real prisoners, are being demonized in the media for trying to have a Truth and Light festival. How do we combat these great narratives that are constantly pushed upon us by the mainstream media?
Well, fortunately, we're in a unique time in the media in this country. Most of the people who watch CNN, almost without exception, those people don't matter to us politically, and nobody that pays attention to CNN matters to us politically, and everybody that matters to us doesn't pay any attention to CNN. So we've got a very segmented media these days. So, whereas it used to kind of doom you if your policy position or your candidate was demonized on the evening news with Dan Rather or whomever back in the day, the audiences have been so segmented that it doesn't have the same punch power. It doesn't have the same ability to destroy a candidate or to hurt a movement as it did in the past. And I think that you're kind of a good example of that, because there are a lot of people that get their news from you, that trust you, that they don't care what the New York Times says. They don't care what CNN or MSNBC says. It's very segmented. But on the other hand, that's kind of dangerous, because you have the people who only get their news from MSNBC or CNN or the New York Times. They're walking around saying, hey, what are you talking about? They're like 20 police officers were murdered in cold blood on January 6th. And they believe that because they don't have any countervailing media source. So, it doesn't trouble me, but it does trouble me for that reason. And in some ways, it's affecting our politics and our campaigns, because you get candidates who are running for offices, either Republican or Democrat, and whereas in the past they might buckle down and stomach a tough interview with CNN or the New York Times, now they just ignore them. And there's no reason not to ignore them, because the people we need to vote for us don't really pay attention to CNN. The people that they need to vote for them, maybe they don't pay any attention to your show or to Fox News or to Breitbart.
So let's shift to 2024 then, because obviously these narratives are kind of everywhere. Trump seems wildly popular. I think there are a lot of people out there that just assume that he's going to get the nomination. I really like your approach of the bounty on any presidential candidate, because I don't think that we know what's going to happen in 2024, not because he's not wildly popular, but because it's largely out of the people's hands in these primaries. And I think that you're going to see a lot of mainstream Republicans kind of team up on him as these criminal court cases take place, especially the one with the quote unquote Espionage Act and the documents. What do you see developing for 2024? Is Trump going to get the nod? Is that a possibility? Is it a probability?
It's definitely a probability. It looks likely. The truth is, I don't know, and I'm not going to believe anybody that says they know for certain. There's a lot of time between now and Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina. But what I can tell you is that President Trump's campaign is firing on all cylinders. And while I think others had hoped that some of these indictments would cause him to stumble, what they've actually done is rally the base to him, and also taken up so much oxygen in the room for news coverage of alternative candidates, such that it's basically taking away their opportunity to put themselves forward, because there's all this focus on the indictments and the responses and everything surrounding the case. Because just imagine if there was no indictment in New York, there's no indictment from Jack Smith's grand jury, what would we be talking about? Maybe Mike Pence has a new initiative on, gun rights, and DeSantis has got some plan to, secure the border or whatever it is, but they don't have the room or the time, the airtime, the oxygen to advocate for themselves in that way, because all of this huge media firestorm, left, right, center media, etc., around these indictments. And to the lay Republican, it looks like the Biden administration is targeting a political opponent over what's, especially the New York indictment, which is really bizarre. That a president who has the ability to declassify documents, had some documents, what documents did he have? It's like he got into a fight with the National Archives librarians. And so they're trying to put him in prison for that. So it's really just bizarre. It's not the kind of thing where you have there was some prosecution of politicians in the past where they're caught on video, accepting bribes or something with that level of clarity. Or like with Bill Clinton, where he clearly, committed perjury. There's nothing like that. He's just gotten in a fight with some librarians about some papers, was he selling them to the Chinese? No. Was he using them to blackmail somebody? No. It was clearly just some archival material, and so because of that, while the left is really hyperventilating over, we're finally going to get Trump this time. How many times have you heard that? How many times have you heard that since 2016? Oh, he's finished now. He did what? Oh, it's over for him. So he still maintains his tremendous charisma. He hasn't really been challenged on that front by any of the other candidates, as much as they might try. He wins on charisma, and I think that he wins on infrastructure and organization. And honestly, you see other candidates tripping over easy baskets. You see DeSantis being constantly handicapped over and over again by stupid decisions made by his staff, who are clearly not cut out for a national campaign. It's like, oh, they think they win an easy basket race down in Florida, where they got a governor with a great record and an absolutely crippled, horrible Democrat opponent. Of course, they're going to win by a landslide. And to think that a team that could get you through that big, difficult struggle can get you through a presidential is, it's bizarre to think that. And there really needs to be a correction on his team. Everybody else, I've heard them referred to as Keebler elves. It's going to be tough to see how any of them break through. But, Iowa's a place where, dreams are made. You see a lot of unexpected candidates come out of the rearview mirror and stunt the front runners. So it's a very peculiar place and a difficult place to get a good read on. It's even a difficult place to poll. So, like I said, if there's going to be a breakout, it's probably going to have to happen in Iowa. And I don't even know who that would be for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Rand Paul might eventually put his hat in the mix. I don't know how much support you get compared to Trump, because obviously Trump is just that popular. I'm in total agreement there. My issue, and by the way, I think that both charges are extremely thin. The fight with the librarians, however, has been escalated to the Espionage Act. And then you see a similar thing, which is actually worse, if you actually believe there's any problems with this at all, with Biden. And if you say had a fixed election in which Biden gets in there but doesn't get sworn in because they threatened him with the same thing they're going to try to convict Trump of, it's kind of a deep state wet dream. That's all I'm saying, Matt. I hope it doesn't happen. I'd like to see, obviously, Trump beat every single charge, but I think that I don't think they'll get him in New York. I'm worried about the espionage stuff, and I'm worried about 2024 on a lot of levels. I know that you're out there. The bounty is great. Tell people about the website, the organization, and how they can help you specifically.
Look, I'm going to give everybody in your audience a chance to have a bigger impact on an election that any of them have probably ever had in their lives. And it's very simple. Sign up at lookaheadamerica.org. And in a few weeks, I'm going to send you the address of 10 voters in Virginia who usually don't vote. And I'm going to ask you to send each of these 10 people a postcard from your beautiful part of the country, encouraging them to show up and vote, to vote by mail, vote early in person, or even vote on election day. But I'm going to give you their addresses. So to get those addresses, please sign up at lookaheadamerica.org, send them, and then you'll be given the credit, I believe, for getting more people to vote than you probably ever have before, and it costs you almost nothing. So please sign up at lookaheadamerica.org for our postcard program. I can't wait to get you engaged.
Thank you so much, Matt. We will be back after this with Chris Paul talking the sound of freedom. It is Making Sense of the Madness.